When I talk about COVID and influenza and how they're pretty different in the way they work and how often people are catching them, one question I get pretty often is, wait, isn't it normal to get the flu every single year, the same way people are getting COVID about once a year? And the answer is no. A study from Imperial College in London in 2015 found that adults over 30 only get flu twice per decade. That's once every 5 years. They did find that kids were more likely to get it, maybe around every other year. This paper from the CDC in 2017 talked about how the assumed range in the past was anywhere between 5 to 20% of the population getting flu in any given year. And they wanted to pinpoint that a little more precisely, so they did two different statistical analyses, and both methods came up with a median of about 8% a year having symptomatic flu. But they do note that, like with COVID, a high rate of influenza infections are asymptomatic. Your body's immune system doesn't rev up in a certain way where you feel a lot of symptoms. So using those two pieces together, we would say that 8% of the population gets symptomatic flu each year, and maybe 16% of the population has flu of some kind with or without symptoms. So that's only 1 in 5 people getting flu every year. So where are we at with COVID? Well, Dr. Mike Herger at Tulane, who does a lot of work with COVID in wastewater, looking at wastewater numbers, he estimates that the average person has had COVID 3.2 times in 4 years, so almost once per year. So adults getting COVID once per year is wildly different than the every 5 years that we used to get flu. Also, as I've mentioned, flu is way less contagious than COVID. There's a weird conspiracy that I don't even understand what they're getting at, where people say that, during COVID mitigations, that flu and cold disappeared, as if, some people don't believe viruses exist, which is a wild one to me. I think what they're saying is that, disease is sort of, socially constructed, and we can just say that there's flu or say that there's not. I think that's what they're saying. I don't even fully get it. But anyway, COVID is way more contagious than flu. When people were trying to avoid COVID, we actually eradicated an entire type of flu, a type of influenza B called the Yamagata line, because it just couldn't infect people because we were all taking measures to avoid it. Now, I will do an entire video comparing COVID and flu in detail. That's something that's been requested by Oh Hello Heather and other comments. I think it's just important. But this is one of those stunning images that I'll break down more in detail. But basically, they did a study in mice where they basically blended either influenza or COVID spike protein in a way that could help it bind to ACE2 receptors in mice. We have ACE2 receptors all over our body in humans. Mice have them too, but they're kind of different. So when they helped COVID bind to a mouse ACE2 receptor, it infected. Look, everywhere there's red is where the spike protein was able to get into. So you see every organ lights up red. Versus influenza, it's the lungs and I think also the liver slightly, but it's really a respiratory disease. It's the lungs that are getting infected. Whereas COVID, entire body, all the organs.